Compressors have for a long time been an essential tool in the production of recorded music. There are several types of compressors, with each type particularly suited for enhancing vocal tracks, instrument tracks, or whole mixes. If you would like to know more about the types and their uses, have a look at the video I did some time back with an overview of compressor types, their uses, and plugins emulating classic hardware in these categories. It's linked in this video's description. One type that has been in wide use for a very long time is optical. The most legendary optical compressor is the Teletronics LA-2A Leveling Amplifier, first made in the early 1960s. This compressor has been used on a huge amount of recorded music since then, and it's still widely used these days, mostly in emulation plugin form. New hardware versions are still available, but they are very expensive. The most frequent use of the LA-2A has been on vocals, but it has also seen a lot of use on bass, acoustic guitar, keyboards, drums, as well as other instruments. There are only two main controls, a knob for peak reduction and a knob for gain. There's also a switch for selection between compressing and limiting, which changes the ratio, and a switch for selection of the meter displaying gain reduction or output gain with metering reference of plus 4 dB or plus 10 dB on the LA-2A. Some of the emulation plugins have additional features such as sidechain capability and presets. LALA has full sidechain capability, and the Universal Audio LA-2A has presets. LALA also has the ability to mix the dry incoming signal with the process signal. I have been using the LA-2A emulation plugin from Analog Obsession called LALA for quite some time, and I really like it. It's free, as are all Analog Obsession plugins, but if you use them and like them, you can support his work on Patreon. Universal Audio has been making LA-2A plugins for more than 20 years, and they also make the hardware version. They made the LA-2A available free until the end of October 2023, and I got it to try it out and compare it to LALA. I got a special deal on their Teletronics LA-2A Leveler collection, so I bought it, and in my limited comparison, the free LA-2A sounds very similar to the silver LA-2A in that bundle. I decided to make this video after seeing very big difference in what these plugins sound like on various tracks. Although these compressors tend to be mostly used on vocals and bass, they are also often used on drums, and I will show the two used on kick, snare, and a whole drum track. It's quite easy to hear the effect they have on these when listening on headphones or good speakers. I have set them all up in compressor mode for maximum gain reduction of peaks of 4 to 5 decibels and unity gain, so peak level of their output is the same as that of the tracks they are processing. After the demonstration of the two, I will briefly look at them in Plugin Doctor to see how they compare. First, I play kick solo with no plugin processing on it. Now the kick with LALA active and bypassed. Now the kick with LA-2A active and bypassed. Now the whole kit with LALA on the kick bypassed and engaged. Now the whole kit with LA-2A on the kick bypassed and engaged. Now the snare solo with LALA bypassed and engaged. Now the snare solo with LA-2A engaged and bypassed. Now the whole kit with LALA on the snare bypassed and engaged. Now the whole kit is LA-2A on the snare engaged and bypassed. Now the whole kit with LALA on both kick and snare bypassed and engaged. Now the whole kit with LA-2A on both kick and snare engaged and bypassed. Now LALA on the whole kit bypassed and engaged. Now LA-2A on the whole kit engaged and bypassed. I think most would agree that in this context, these two compressor plugins sound very different. Personally, if I was going to use either on drums, I would use LALA because I like how gentle it is while still enhancing in a way I find pleasing to my ears. I fully understand some may feel it does next to nothing, and the Universal Audio LA-2A would be their choice. Now we take a look at both plugins in Plugin Doctor. First we have a look at what the two plugins do to the frequency response. The input is a sweep from 0 to little over 20,000 Hz. With both plugins bypassed, the line is flat at 0 dB. Engaging LALA, we see a roll-off at frequencies below just over 20 Hz and a slight boost of approximately 1 decibel around 15,000 Hz. Engaging the LA-2A, we see slight boost to around 1 decibel starting from just below 10 Hz and a slight boost up to 1 decibel from just over 5,000 Hz, peaking at 20,000 Hz and rolling off sharply above 20,000 Hz. With both engaged, we can see they are quite flat between 20 Hz and 10,000 Hz, and both give a slight boost between 10,000 and 20,000 Hz. This means both have negligible effect on frequency response in the audible range. Now we look at harmonic analysis. The input is as close as Plugin Doctor allows to 1000 Hz, and with both plugins bypassed, we can see the 1K vertical line and noise below minus 175 decibels. Engaging LALA, we can see the addition of quite a lot of additional harmonics, with the highest at 2K approximately minus 40 dB, minus 50 dB at 4K, and minus 75 dB around 3K. Rest are all below minus 100 dB. Doing the same with the LA-2A, the highest is again at 2K of minus 50 dB, with 3K, 4K, 5K, 6K, 7K, 8K, and 9K between minus 50 dB and minus 100 dB. Rest are below minus 100 dB. Now we look at them both engaged. Both add quite a lot of harmony content, although even the peaks are quite a lot quieter than the test frequency, and my guess is the additional harmony content is part of both being emulation of hardware with optical, tube, or valves in Australia and UK, and transformer components. Now we look at what they do to dynamics. Engaging LALA, we see that even with the peak reduction knob set to 0, there's a reduction around 1 to 2 decibels as the signal approaches 0 dB. With the knob set to 10, indicating 5.7 decibels of peak reduction, the curve is close enough to this value, as is what the meter on the plug-in is showing. With the knob set to 20, indicating 12.1 decibels of peak reduction, we see once again the curve and the meter showing close enough to this. Setting the knob to 30, 40, 50, 60 and 70 shows the curve progressively showing lower peak reduction than indicated setting the peak reduction knob. LA-2A shows no gain reduction with the peak reduction knob set to 0. With the knob set to 10, we see around 1 to 2 decibels of gain reduction. With the knob set to 20, we see around 6 decibels of gain reduction. With the knob set to 30, we see around 10 decibels of gain reduction. With the knob set to 40, we see around 13 decibels of gain reduction. With the knob set to 50, we see around 15 decibels of gain reduction. With the knob set to 60, we see around 22 decibels of gain reduction. With the knob set to 70, we see around 24 decibels of gain reduction. In all cases, the meter indicates close enough to the gain reduction curves are showing. Now we look at what settings the peak reduction knob of both shows for the same amount of gain reduction. Given LALA shows gain reduction in decibels when setting the peak reduction knob, and the LA-2A doesn't, I set the LALA peak reduction knob in 5 decibel increments and adjust the LA-2A peak reduction knob to as close a match as possible in peak reduction. One thing that is clear from this is that the LA-2A peak reduction knob needs to be set much higher than the LALA peak reduction knob for the same amount of peak reduction. Given how different the two sound in the context I use them in for this demonstration, I conclude the choice between them is one of personal preference and how they sound on other tracks. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please give it a like. Also, please leave a comment with your experience with these two or anything else relevant.